Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. We are going to begin a new course here, and this course is entitled The History of Philosophy. Now, when it comes to philosophy, it's important to note that when we talk about different philosophical ideas, they are philosophical ideas. They may not be something that is correct. They may be something that seems also, they may be something that seems appeasing to the mind or possible to the mind, but if we have a religious text against it, we have something against it, then we cannot go and take that view. So just because it's philosophical doesn't mean 100% it's the only way and only thing. We believe that intellect, akal, takes you where it takes you to a place, takes you to recognition of Allah, takes you to submission to Allah, and takes you and finds many things on its way, but it doesn't take you all the way. There are things in which intellect cannot reach on its own. Therefore, you need wahi, you need revelation. So we must filter the philosophical things with authentic deen, with real religion. That being said, this point people sometimes don't realize, and they either emphasize on philosophy, or emphasize on text. What we need is a harmony. We need to know intellect's proper place and wahi's place, and they go together in harmony. So something in philosophical thought may sound okay because why? Because it's an intellectual possibility. It's okay. It makes sense, right, to your mind in that sense of an intellectual possibility. But if the other side is proven, then that one is acceptable as well. So what does Wahi come? Revelation, Quran, the Sunnah, they come and they tell us the correct side to take. And also if something is against that correct side. This is why we must know the Quran, we must know the Thaqalain, we must know the teachings of Maktab al-Ahlul Bayt, of the school of Ahlul Bayt. We must know the teachings of them. So that way, if something comes to our minds, we get in some deep philosophical thought and we think, oh, this sounds possible, we can refute those wrong ideas by having correct, firm belief in the revealed scriptures. Okay? So this is the criteria. I caution this. This way, inshallah, I'll be free on the day of judgment that I told you that not everything in philosophy is correct. You must follow 100% correct what you find in the Quran and the reliable resources of what's come through the religion. And then if it's something intellectual, akli, from the philosophical or theological side, and it doesn't go against any of that, okay. If your mind took you there, okay, no problem. So that's the first thing. I must give this kind of caution when we're talking about philosophy, because sometimes some people think philosophy is like, it's the ends, right? It's all of it. It's not. It's just a kind of intellectual endeavor. It's very useful, but we may not agree with everything. And we have to see if Ahlul Bayt and the Quran actually agrees with certain things. So that being noted, that being noted, um, that being noted, we have to keep that in mind throughout this whole course. Today's course that we're beginning is entitled A History of Philosophy. Okay? History of Philosophy. History of Philosophy. And we're going to be following a book by Misbah, by Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, who has passed away some years ago, radiallahu anhu. He was, from what I recall, he was a student of Sayyid Tabatabai, the author of Bidayah al-Hikmah and al-Nihaya Hikmah. And he wrote this book called Philosophical Introductions. And this book is large. It has a section for introduction to or it has a section for the history of philosophy, and it has a section for epistemology, and it has then a section for ontology, and it has many different areas in it, and they're divided into lessons. Um, so we'll split this. I'm not saying we will teach the whole book, but we will split this here. Inshallah, maybe we'll do epistemology later on. And we have Bidayah Hikmah that's supposed to be completed in upper levels as an introductory Hausa course. And we'll use this as the history of philosophy right now. We'll do that section of history of philosophy. So we are in lesson 1 then. Now, what's lesson 1 entitled? Lesson 1 is entitled A Glance at the Course of Philosophical Thought. Okay, a glance at the course of philosophical thought. From when? From the beginnings of philosophical thought to the epoch of Islam, to the Muslim philosophical thinking. Now, this should be noted too. Sometimes people say they title Islamic philosophy. They say this is Islamic philosophy, and sometimes others say no, it's Muslim philosophy. I agree that we should call it Muslim philosophy. Why? Because this is the kind of philosophical thought that was somehow filtered, generated, and which was or occurring within the thoughts of Muslim thinkers. Maybe if we say Islamic, then we're giving it a title of coming down with the religion. If we're meaning that kind of thing, then that's not correct. Yes, there are philosophical notions in the religion. Yes, there's actually notions in the religion. But as a whole body, a system, a discipline of science that has certain principles and rules and categories, then we don't find that we have this in the Sharia of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu coming down. But we do find that there's occurrence of philosophical thought occurring amongst the Muslims, that there was an importing of uh, of Greek philosophy into the Muslim world, and there you had this kind of filtering and critiquing, and you had this blossoming of philosophical endeavors. Not everything was correct. Not everything is correct. This tradition continues on mostly in the Shia circles, um, but it was used to be big amongst the Sunni circles. So the beginning of the philosophical thought, the history of human thought. I say, what is the tariq of the harakat of human mind, of the human intellect? What is the movement? What is the history of the movement of human thought? The history of human thought, as well as the creation of man, meaning the creation of insan, humanity, goes back beyond what we term as recorded history. That is, that ever since man was created, he has this ability to think. There's a history of thought. Akal, intellect, is part of human essence. So wherever mankind lived throughout history, thought has been an inseparable characteristic of humanity. People have not been devoid of thinking, although they may not have thought correctly all the time. They may have gone down wrong directions. They haven't been devoid of thought. And even you see the prophets that God sends throughout history, they're calling people to think, you know? There's no God except for God. God is not an idol. Uh, justice is good. They're calling people think, you know? Use your minds. So you could kind of infer that from this, that people need to think. They're they're inviting them to use this mind that Allah's giving them. So you can never say that there was a period in time where humans were separated from the characteristic of a history of thought. Wherever mankind has placed his feet, he or she has taken thinking and intellection with him. Why? Because humans are akli beings. They are haywanonautic. So wherever they go, they are a thinking, rational being. Now, there is no certain and precise information about the unwritten thoughts of mankind. Now, only Allah knows, the unwritten thoughts, except that which has been surmised by archaeologists. So some archaeologists have come and they have assumed some things, said, maybe this is the way it was on the basis of uncovered remains. So they look at artifacts they find, uncovered remains, some writings, things like that. And they surmise, they assume that must be the progression of human thought. This must have been what was occurring. But besides those artifacts, you don't have it. Now, how do you know that there wasn't that their writing abilities were not less and their thoughts were quite advanced, right? Or the person whose artifacts you're finding, so there's different things that could be critiqued over there. Plus, we believe that mankind began with Prophet Adam, and there were other creations on the earth. Some hadith suggests, like in Tafsir Qumi, there's a hadith, and these things um, wiped out for the wrong behaviors. So they're called ananas. Um, so anyways, there's discussion over there. Probably I've talked about it. So, however, written thought has remained behind as a caravan of history that has passed. Once mankind started to write their thoughts down, it remained as a kind of caravan of history that has passed since the time of written language. So once language was written down, you had this occurring. Among the kinds of human thought, that which is related to the knowledge of existence. So something you find among human thought is those things which relate to knowledge of wujud, of existence, and to its beginning and end. So at first, he says, these were mixed with religious beliefs. Therefore, it may be said that one must look for the oldest philosophical thoughts among religious thoughts. Now, some people suggest Oriental religious thoughts, but that I think could be maybe debated. Religious thoughts would have began with from humanity with the very Adam and Hawa, with Adam and Eve alayhum salam, and their children. And then their children would have spread out, whichever way God allowed it, taking with them in their thoughts and people changing thoughts and mixing them with falsehoods, and some people going very astray. The histories of philosophy, though, the historians of philosophy, believe that the most ancient collections that are purely philosophical or that are predominantly philosophical are related to the Greek sages. So when you go and when you talk to the historians of philosophy, they say, look, what we find as being the most intact philosophical works of history is those which go back to the Greeks. Go back to ancient Greece, who lived, and these people, they lived, the Greek sages, they lived approximately 6 centuries before Prophet Jesus, alayhi salam. So, so this is under that view. Now, you're only talking about works which are predominantly philosophical, meaning that if you went to religious text like Judaism, what you find in Judaism, um, then you'll find philosophical notions at times. I'm sure it's possible you find some of those things over there. If you look, it's probably there. Um, then you have things which are philosophical in nature, but you don't have predominantly philosophical work. Like something is mostly primarily dedicated to philosophy. And what do we mean by philosophy? Well, we'll talk about it, inshallah, as we go on. So scholars of that time, where the 6 centuries before Jesus, so 6 centuries BC, scholars of that time are mentioned who have tried to come to know existence. They wanted to try to understand existence. What is existence? And the beginning and end of the cosmos. You notice a lot of these terms we have in English for philosophy, ontology, cosmology, they come from Greek. They wanted to understand ontos, onto, and cosmos in order to interpret the appearance and changes that occur in existence. Fil mawjud, they wanted to interpret the appearance, understand the appearance and changes that occur in mawjud, in mawjudat, in the existent things. They express different and occasionally contradictory opinions, however. So when you go look at their works, they sometimes they express different views from each other. They occasionally contradicted each other. So they had contradictory opinions. So what's this tell you? That just because they have a mind doesn't mean that it is correct. Just because they can think doesn't mean everything somebody thinks is correct. Somebody could make major faults in their thinking. So, and at the same time as having contradictory opinions and expressing differences, they do not hide the fact that their thoughts were influenced more or less by Oriental religious beliefs and cultures. That's what is said about them. That, you could look into that. In any case, the free atmosphere for discussion and criticism in the Greece in those days prepared the ground for developing and taking some kind of merit in philosophical thought. So this thing was kind of like occurring, and they had maybe the freedom and in this kind of atmosphere, and to be able to critique it. So this kind of discipline was beginning to occur. That area was turned into kind of a nursery for philosophy, a nursery for philosophy. Now, naturally, the beginning thoughts were not properly organized and arranged. So in the beginning, the thoughts that they had were not properly organized or arranged, and the problems for research were not precisely categorized, let alone that each category should have a specific name, title, and characteristic method. So you had this differing, contradictory thoughts occurring, and it's giving a kind of fertile ground for philosophy to be born, for philosophical thought to occur. Why? They could critique it, they could think about it, and this could occur. Similarly, we should reflect, You know, when we approach different ideas in our theology, in our fiqh, if we are not allowed to confront those ideas, if we don't confront them, if we don't approach them, of course, we must be firm in our beliefs, but we have to approach them. Then, if we don't approach them, then we are not growing. We're kind of smothering ourselves out. Because when we have a new thought and it's wrong, we go and we approach it, we find its weak points, and we prove our side. We become stronger then in our beliefs. Or if we have a difference of opinion about fiqh and somebody spoon feeds us a fatwa of a marja, says this is the mashhur view, or this is the view of my marja, and you just take it, and you're ignorant of that other side and the details of it, then maybe you'll become hostile to the truth. What if that other opinion was correct? Of course, you must be critical, and even critical of yourself. But having the differing views gives a breeding ground, a fertile ground for improved thought, for those who are sincere thinkers, for those who are sincere researchers, for those who are open to finding the truth. So in sum, all the ideas were called ilm. They were all called science. They call this, ontology is the science of, so ology, this is the kind of thing. Ontology is the science of uh, of existence, right? So all of these ideas that they had were called science, and they called them hikmah. Now these things maybe they were ideas, right? Real ilm corresponds to reality, certitude, things like that, or certitude can be a kind of knowledge for yourself, even if it may be uh, mistaken, but you think you have knowledge. But these terms are can be debated, but we're just saying this is what it was referred to back then. As for the reality of these terms like ilm and hikmah and ma'rifah, that could be discussed from an Islamic lens. Um, we better to understand these things as being diverse information and opinions, some of which could have been true knowledge and some of which could have been false information. But these are all termed as sciences and alike. Okay, so here I'm going to stop at the appearance of sophism and skepticism. Sophism and skepticism is one of the important way stations that we stop at before the birth of Greek philosophy, as it is, from Socratic, Platonic, Aristotelian philosophy. So here I will end the lesson, inshallah, and we will continue, inshallah, in the future with lesson 2. Wa akhir duwana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.